Kicking off at number 5, Dren from Splice. For those of you that haven't seen the 2009 French-Canadian sci-fi horror Splice, written and directed by Vincenzo Natali, it's actually a pretty decent horror flick and one of the few times that I think a filmmaker has gotten the use of oversaturated CGI right. It's also like a super messed up film. The main antagonist of the film is a humanoid creature named Dren, who was created by two scientists, Elsa and Clive, played by Sarah Polley and Adrian Brody. The two of them mixed human DNA with DNA from multiple animals, and the result was Dren, the strangely serene yet terrifying result of genetic splicing. From creation, the creature aged exponentially and matured to a 6-year-old child in just 20 days. As she morphed into a mature adult creature, she developed a tail with a tip like a scorpion, webbed feet, the ability to produce bat-like wings, as well as aquatic lungs that enabled her to breathe underwater. Oh, and also near the end of the film, she morphed into a he and proceeded to impregnate Elsa, the scientist. Told you it was messed up. Yeah, SCP Foundation, lock this one up, guys, although it did get a rock to the head, but still, lock it away. Swinging in at number 4, Headcrabs from Half-Life. And forget these guys because I hate headcrabs. If you ever played Half-Life or Half-Life 2, you'll understand the deep, dire dread of hearing a scuttling "ree" coming from the end of a corridor. It's a headcrab, and they're gonna annoy the hell out of you whilst trying to feast on your brain. Known humorously as headhumpers, the headcrabs are omnivorous, parasitic creatures, widely considered one of the most iconic creatures in the Half-Life series. Hailing from the borderlands known as Zen, they exist purely to latch themselves onto a host and take over their motor functions, resulting in headcrab zombies. Although there is some upside to it and a potential chance for the SCP Foundation to utilise these terrifying little guys for the better. Because as Half-Life 2 pointed out, headcrabs can actually be domesticated, as seen with Lamar, the headcrab affectionately named by Isaac Kleiner, a research scientist for Black Mesa. Headcrabs can actually be debeaked, rendering them unable to break into a host's head. This also suppresses their parasitic instincts, and perhaps the SCP Foundation would be willing and able to kit their scientists out with friendly, cute little headcrab pets. No, forget that, I hate them. Next up at number 3, Parallax from DC Comics. And some of the most powerful entities in the SCP Foundation would cower at this guy, which is why it's about high time that the O5 Council get their asses in gear and lock this guy away. Get to it. Parallax is a demonic parasitic entity dating back to the dawn of time. It is the living, sentient embodiment of fear, which travels from world to world, causing entire civilizations to destroy themselves out of paranoia. Yeah, you get the picture. Parallax would be right at home in the SCP Foundation. Through being the living embodiment of fear, Parallax is capable of generating and manipulating vast amounts of energy, which would probably be the first red flag for the SCP Foundation, and they'd more than likely be interested in containing and manipulating it into an infinite power source. Just a suggestion, if you're listening, guys. It can alter reality, it can manipulate time, it's the living entity of an emotional concept, and thus, for all intents and purposes, immortally undying. That's Parallax. Lock him up. Swinging it at number 2, the Upside Down from Stranger Things. Let's not sugarcoat it, the Upside Down is incredibly similar in nature to several concepts already floating around in the SCP Foundation's sphere of influence, but that's no excuse to ignore the encroaching terror of the fictional Veil of Shadows. As the show so brilliantly explained, the Upside Down is an alternate dimension existing in parallel to the human world, as in unfortunate individuals such as poor Will Byers can involuntarily slip in between the two. Most of, if not all, of the flora and fauna present in the Upside Down are linked together in a hive mind controlled by the Mind Flayer, which essentially forms a massive dimensional superorganism, some of which results in a species of strange humanoid predators as seen in season 1, dubbed Demogorgons. After the end of season 2, we understand that the gate connecting the two dimensions was supposedly severed, but it's the interaction that the show's main characters have with the Upside Down that would be a source of curiosity for the Foundation. Think about it, the highest stakes set out in the show are the fact that no one is really willing or able to explore this terrifying new dimension. They just want to get their friends out and survive, except Barb. Poor Barb. Imagine what the Foundation would do with the strange extra-dimensional resources at their disposal when applying it to the Upside Down. It'd be the discovery of a brave, strange new world, or they'd all get consumed by tendrils. Either way, I'm down. And finally, our number 1 spot, The Thing, from John Carpenter's The Thing. Which, as regular contributor to the Foundation Shaggy Dreadlocks claimed, was a potential project that he was already working on for his newest addition to the SCP archives. The Thing embodies everything that the SCP Foundation is about. Sound science, an alien life form, and a completely terrifying evolutionary concept, and it slots in perfectly right between the likes of SCP-2075 and SCP-610. The Thing is an extremely hostile, shape-shifting extraterrestrial organism that has the ability to assimilate other life forms in order to survive and spread itself. As the 1982 film alludes to, the original physical characteristics of the Thing are unknown, and it could have assimilated hundreds, if not thousands, of other species before it crashed on Earth. And that's definitely what would happen if it ever got loose, which is exactly why the Foundation would need to contain it. After the Thing has assimilated an organism, it is capable of imitating them exactly down to their memories, characteristics, and even mannerisms. When a part of the Thing becomes cut in two, both of those pieces become their own creatures and operate separately. It's a science fiction horror concept that continues to propagate its way across the genre, just like the amorphous, hostile alien life form that it is. And it'd be right at home, locked away in the SCP Foundation, safe and sound. Kicking off at number 5, the Jumanji board game, Jumanji.
I quit playing board games 5 years ago. Sarah.
A game for those who seek to find a way to leave their world behind. Of course, this anomalous board game finds itself on our list because, in all reality, as soon as one kid mysteriously got sucked into its supernatural jungle and then later emerged as a bearded, bare-chested Robin Williams, RIP, the Foundation would be all over it like red ants on a honeyed up forehead. It was first introduced in the 1981 short story by Chris Van Allsburg and then later popularised in the fantastic 1995 film, and really I have nothing bad to say about Jumanji. It's insanely good. But let's not have that detract from the fact that when we boil it down, the concept of the Jumanji board game would have terrifying real-world implications. You roll a dice, your piece moves on the board, and then it manifests forward any number of horrifying creations that the jungle can spit out. Bats, plague-riddled mosquitoes, lions, man-eating vegetation, a stampede of rhinos, quicksand, crocodiles, or the evil hunter from the darkest wild, Van Pelt. Come on guys, it's got SCP Foundation stamped all over it. Oh, and also we can't forget its equally supernatural board game brother, Zathura, because anything that can summon a black hole with the roll of a dice kind of needs to be locked away. Next up at number 4, Sadako's videotape, Ringu. And you'll be aware that I didn't include the full tape scene this time, although you'll be fine regardless, unless your phone starts ringing right about now. Ugh, sorry about that. In actual fact though, there is so much to the cursed videotape that encompasses the Japanese Ring series of novels and films that the Foundation would have an incredibly hard time trying to contain it. And because of that, it'd most likely be key to class. We don't really have to skirt around the function of this one either. It's a cursed videotape pertaining to the existence of the horrifying entity Sadako Yamamura, who crawls out of a well in a videotape and then crawls out of the television that you're watching it on to kill people who watch it. Not cool. However, in the novels, the 7-day curse thing is actually a smallpox virus that creates a tumour in the victim's throat, and after 7 days, they die of a heart attack. This virus is mutated and distributed at will by the vengeful supernatural spirit Sadako, and it also contains a strand of her DNA, which on several occasions has resulted in being fertilised and thus triggering her resurrection. Just when you think she's dead and it's finally over, she's back again. Yeah, this one's going straight into containment, hopefully in a room that is perpetually on fire that no one can ever enter. Swinging in at number 3, the Venom Symbiote, Marvel Comics.
Eddie? What was that?
Oh, I have a parasite. Yeah.
And of course, the only thing we have to highlight from that film is Tom Hardy's fantastic performance as Eddie Brock. 2003 called They Want Their CGI Back. Anyway, as well as terrifying entities, I'd quite like to also include some anomalous fictional items that could potentially be beneficial to the Foundation. Just like with the pet headcrabs from our last list, who were pretty cute. So enter the Venom Symbiote, well, specifically all symbiotes because there's an entire planet of them. And a Foundation that also had the power of the Clintar symbiotes would be an incredibly powerful fictional organisation indeed. The symbiotes are a race of highly powerful parasitic entities that seek to bind with a humanoid host, often taking on their mental and personal attributes, which results in further augmenting their powers. Without getting too bogged down in the Marvel Universe canon, just imagine how insane it would be for a Venom symbiote to bind with any number of the entities within the SCP Foundation's containment. SCP-076, also known as Abel, combined with the Venom symbiote. Holy moly. SCP-106? Nah, I'm good thank you. What about SCP-682, the Unkillable Lizard, combined with the Venom symbiote? The multiverse would be doomed. Coming in at number 2, Necronomicon Ex Mortis, Evil Dead. And yeah, of course, the titular villain of the Evil Dead franchise, our boy, the Book of the Dead, the Naturom Demonto, and this one oozes some classic evil eldritch entity that makes up the canonical bread and butter of the SCP Foundation. I mean, you only have to look at it to realise that a book made from the flesh of a literal demon face kind of spells bad business for the publishing industry. And that's before it's even started to summon forth the Kandarian demon and usher forward an army of darkness and deadites into the world. Supposedly written by one of the Dark Ones, which are essentially the Evil Dead version of Lovecraft's Great Old Ones, although they're kind of the same thing canonically. The Necronomicon has a bucket list worth of terrifying corporeal powers that could easily result in an XK level extinction event. Mainly reciting any passages written throughout the book often results in some eldritch shenanigans that commonly wind up with a cabin full of demonically possessed dead teenagers. On top of that, you've got the power to literally tear apart the fabric of time and space, resurrect the dead, combine its paper body into that of any creature it touches, and also usher in a brand new dark age of Hellspawn and Hellfire. Yeah, lock this one up, please, guys. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, Lemarchands boxes, Hellraiser. And I specifically say any of Lemarchand's puzzle boxes because all of them should be rounded up, locked away, shut in a big old chest with all of the keys dissolved in a vat of acid. But mainly the Layman configuration. Sorry guys, I'm just covering my due diligence. I don't want any Cenobites sniffing around again. Sorry, probably shouldn't have said that either. Anyway, as the events of Clive Barker's fantastic Hellraiser series outline, Lemarchand's puzzle boxes were created by Philip Lemarchand, a character from Barker's novella The Hellbound Heart, who was revealed to be a mass murderer who uses human fat and bone to construct his mysterious Cenobite summoning vessels. Although there are other boxes throughout the Hellraiser film series, as seen in both Hellraiser 2 and Hellraiser Hellworld, most of their powers are otherwise unknown. But as we all know, in the original Hellraiser, Kirsty Cotton uses the Layman configuration, stolen from her abusive father who had previously used it to deglove his entire body. Oh, and also it summons Cenobites, the demonic hosts that reign over hell, who are demons to some but angels to others. If I'm being honest, Pinhead and his Order of the Gash would more likely be a nuisance to the SCP Foundation, but the Layman configuration is a literal pager to hell. So yeah, of course, it makes the top spot. Kicking off at number 5, Sutter Cane from In the Mouth of Madness.
All done.
Now there are many entries in the archives of the SCP Foundation that document unwitting humanoids who've stumbled upon various terrifying anomalous properties. For instance, SCP-150, a seemingly normal woman named Iris who just so happens to have a particular anomalous relationship with a paranormal Polaroid camera. In that case then the notorious Sutter Cane would be right at home in the vaults of the SCP Foundation, because the living conduit of a horde of eldritch abominations needs to be kept far away from a typewriter, right? Yeah, I'm glad we're all on the same page. As it turns out, in the final events of John Carpenter's incredible apocalyptic trilogy, one of the most existentially terrifying figures in horror fiction was created. Sutter Cane, the final villain of the awesome Lovecraftian inspired film In the Mouth of Madness, a horror fiction writer that demonstrates the arcane ability to literally write reality itself. As the events of the film play out, it is slowly revealed that Sutter Cane has been keeping the eldritch cosmic void at bay by writing stories about them, but eventually his goal of reaching a godlike level of horror fiction finally comes to fruition, and his works literally take over the planet. Yeah, I don't think I need to say any more, really. The Foundation needs to lock this guy up and keep him far away from any writing utensils. Next up at number 4, the Laser Glass from Oculus.
Hello again.
And yeah, this one kinda goes without saying, but a horrifying antique mirror possessed by some demonic supernatural force with glowing eyes finds itself pretty much right at home in the confines of the SCP Foundation. As portrayed in the awesome 2014 film Oculus, directed by Mike Flanagan and starring Karen Gillan, the Laser Glass is an antique looking glass that harnesses the paranormal ability to create horrifying hallucinations in its victims, often driving them to tragic suicide or incredibly violent self-mutilation. As the events of the film allude to, the Laser Glass has been passed between its unwitting victims since at least the 1700s and was initially in possession of a couple known as Philip and Virginia Lasser. Philip was the 17th Earl of Leicester and was the first known owner of the mirror as well as its namesake. The Earl hung the Laser Glass proudly over the fireplace of his London estate where he lived with his regal wife. Sometime afterwards though, Philip was found mysteriously burnt to death at the base of his fireplace, the Laser Glass looming ominously above him. According to his housekeepers, he was later reportedly seen in the reflection of the Laser Glass staring at them with bright glowing eyes. Yeah, this one's got SCP Foundation written all over it in blood. Coming up next at number 3, the Tall Man from Phantasm. Yeah, and while we're on that point, we better stick the Sentinel Spheres in the Foundation too, as well as the Tall Man's entire Forsaken Planet. For those of you that haven't seen the resounding cult movie success 1979's Phantasm, written and directed by Don Coscarelli, give it a watch because you'll soon see exactly why we need to lock this guy up, as well as his silver brain-seeking Sentinel Spheres in some deep dark vault for the rest of eternity. When you really think about it, the Tall Man is typical SCP Foundation material. He always sticks to small, sleepy towns, never drawing too much attention to himself, churning away with his anomalous designs. So what's his deal? Well, it's believed that the Tall Man was once a doctor named Jebediah Morningside, a man that lived in the time of the American Civil War that began a series of experiments to bridge the realms of the living and the dead. Well, he managed to stumble upon an interdimensional gateway, and when he returned, he was possessed by an intelligence from another cosmic realm, and his only goal now is to use the dead on Earth as fuel for his alien overlordship. Now he travels from town to town, setting up funeral homes, digging up the recently buried as he goes, in an effort to create a galactic army of the dead that travels through time and space. Yeah, I guess he'd be buddies with SCP-049, I guess. Next up at our number 2 spot, the Shimmer from Annihilation.
What is it?
I don't know.
Now, of course, we've already covered John Carpenter's The Thing in this list-based series, and as is expected, any alien life form that has the innate childlike desire to scramble DNA and turn Earth and all its inhabitants into its worldwide Play-Doh play pit, yeah, they're right at home in the SCP Foundation. However, much like The Thing, at least we know we can kill it with fire, because that's usually the most likely answer when faced with an all-consuming alien biohazard, isn't it? Kill it with fire. Very useful. Well, even though the Thing is a vile tendril of amorphous flesh, the Shimmer from 2018's Annihilation, directed by Alex Garland, takes things to a whole new level. Because the Shimmer takes the whole genetic manipulation deal one step further, and its goal is to absorb everything in its vicinity, mix up its DNA, leaving a part of it behind until everything is assimilated in its image. Yeah, no thank you. I'm honestly not too sure how the Foundation would deal with this one, but the Shimmer, for one thing, will be right at home alongside the anomalous followers of Sarkicism. Hey, it's nice when things things cross over like that, I guess. As the 2018 film explains, the shim arrived on Earth via a meteorite crashing into a lighthouse by the sea. Slowly but surely, it began assimilating the DNA of every living thing in the vicinity. And then eventually we ended up with the horrifying DNA bear demon thing. Yeah. Lock that one away. And finally, coming in at our #1 spot, Silent Hill Main from Silent Hill. Of course, because in all seriousness, I could foresee an entire SCP series based around a town similar to Silent Hill, much like the events of SCP-2480 and the ancient Bodfowl Manor. Although the cinematic depiction of Silent Hill is actually set in West Virginia, the original video game series version of Maine, New England, is just cooler, right? Now, there are many different explanations for the origins of Silent Hill. None of them are actually verified. At first, it was suggested the town was built on an ancient burial ground, it was some anomalous portal to hell, but whatever the truth, the town has witnessed countless occultist activities throughout its history. And, well, whenever you've got an order of cultists in town, it's never good for business. The demonic power of Silent Hill gradually amassed over the centuries, but it wasn't until the immolation of Alessa Gillespie that it reached its full anomalous strength, forever becoming a tainted place that would shift between worlds, fog worlds, other worlds, and our earthly plane, calling out to people with darkness in their hearts to come and pay a visit to Pyramid Head and all of his buddies. Yeah, I don't really need to say much more about Silent Hill being in the SCP Foundation. In fact, we should probably send a few mobile task forces over. Quick time. It's about damn time.